Well, hello, everyone. It's good to see, or not see, but good to chat with everyone, I guess. Hopefully this little glare I'm realizing is may not be the best for this camera, but I will figure it out in just a second. Oh, that's worse. All right, sorry. Some of the things you don't pay attention to, it looked fine when it wasn't on the big screen, and it's not as nice on the smaller screen. So I think that do it a little. There we go. I think that's better. Sorry about that. So we're going to talk a little bit about acupressure. So if you have questions, you can always write it down on the side there. And we have a PowerPoint that you can follow along with. And I think some of you got some of the workbooks as well. So you can always look at those workbooks. But when it comes to acupressure, it's based in traditional Chinese medicine. And traditional Chinese medicine is an ancient practice, been around for 5,000 to 6,000 years. You know, kind of Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine have both been around for a long time. They can argue sometimes back and forth who was longer than the other, but they've both been around for a really long time. And they're very similar, but slightly different. With Chinese medicine, the whole concept is around qi or qi, which is the body's subtle energy flow. I don't know if you've ever heard some of my talks on Ayurvedic holistic therapy, but we have different aspects of the physical body from matter to energy. And the matter is your muscles and bones and blood and chemicals and everything in your body. And the subtle energy is another part of the physical body, but it's qi. And you can use acupressure to manipulate the flow of qi. And in general, with acupressure, the general idea behind Chinese medicine and acupressure is that when the energy is flowing smoothly through the body, then you have health. And when it starts to stagnate or block, you have a dis-ease. And so the whole idea is just to get energy flowing smoothly. And there's a lot of techniques you can do for that, whether it's acupressure. Acupuncture is based on the same concept. So with acupressure, we're using the same points as acupuncture, but we use finger pressure instead of needles. So there are 12 meridians in the body. So I don't know if we have the PowerPoint up or if it is, there's 12 different meridians in the body, and they have very specific channels through which the energy is flowing. There we go. And it's hard for me to kind of do both because if I kind of have to have it on this side screen here so I can still forward it, because if it's on full screen, then I can't see what's happening. So hopefully you can see that okay. But there are 12 meridians in the body, and they have a very specific direction through which they flow. For instance, the Gallbladder Meridian, or the Bladder Meridian, starts right here on the inside of your eyebrows on both sides, goes straight up over the head, and then it exits the head at the back of the head and goes down the back in 2 channels, and then it ends at the little toe. So it's a very specific channel. And there are 12 of those, all connected with the major organs and glands in the body. So the 12 meridians that we have are the liver and gallbladder, the heart and small intestine. Most of them are associated with traditional organs that you know about. But then there are 2 extra ones called the pericardium and the triple warmer. The pericardium is connected with the connective tissue that surrounds the heart. And then the triple warmer, in Chinese medicine, there's said to be 3 burners. And the upper burner regulates your respiration, the middle burner regulates digestion, and the lower burner regulates your elimination. And so the triple warmer works with those 3 systems rather than the specific organ. We also have the spleen and the stomach, the lungs and large intestine, and the kidney and the bladder. And there are those 12 major meridians in the body. And there is a little chart in your book that has some of those pictures. You can also look online and find more detailed charts. Those are just old charts that Aveda created that aren't really detailed, but just give you a general idea of where the meridians are. And when you start getting into Chinese philosophy, I want to talk a little bit about yin and yang theory, because each one of the meridians is either a yin meridian or a yang meridian. And if you don't know much about yin and yang, everybody's probably seen that symbol, even though traditionally it's more black and white. But with each one, it's a very moving symbol. So if you kind of look at that symbol and you start at 6 o'clock, it is mostly yin, which is a darker color, but there is a seed of yang within that seed of yin. So you can never have only one. And as that symbol moves around, if you go counterclockwise on this one, you can see that once that seed of yin goes, it kind of creates a little bit of yang. And then that yang gets larger and larger and larger as you get up to 12 o'clock, that you can never have only yang. And then within that seed of yin is then born. And then all of a sudden, as you go from 12 o'clock back around to 6 o'clock, the yin is growing, growing, growing. And when you're at 3 and 9 o'clock, you're about even with both. And what yin and yang really represent is the duality of the universe. Most everything we know of is dual, meaning we always have a counterpart. So if I say something like, is this, I'm just picking up something that's on my table, salt shaker tall? There we go. You really can't answer that question because it's by itself. Now, if I compare it to me, then it's actually quite short and not tall. But if I put some, if there's something here that's like this tall, then it's and it's way shorter than this one, then all of a sudden this salt shaker is tall. So tall doesn't exist by itself. It only exists in relationship to another object. Duality, in other words, there has to be two with everything. So same thing, like if everyone were female in the universe, then male wouldn't exist. We wouldn't even be able to recognize female, because the only way we recognize female is that we have male. Just like you can't have night and day. If there were if the sun never went down and it was day all the time, we wouldn't be able to recognize day because it'd always be the same. So it really just represents that duality of the universe, and everything is always flowing back and forth in between two opposites. And that's what that yin and yang, or the Tai Chi symbol, represents, is that inner flow between moving back and forth between two different opposite poles. So if we think about the yearly cycle and how the earth moves about the sun, where do you think we might be on that yearly cycle within this yin-yang symbol? So if we're moving around this symbol in a counterclockwise direction, we are just past 3 o'clock, kind of moving back toward 2 o'clock, because earlier this week, or it may have been the end of last week, just a week ago, we hit the vernal equinox. And that's when we were equal parts day and night. And so it was equal between day and night, 12 hours of each. We will keep moving for the next few months into that yang cycle, or that light cycle, because yang is represented by light and the yin is represented by dark. We'll keep moving to that greater points of yang as the days get longer and longer. And then when we hit the summer solstice in June, we'll hit the highest point of yang in the day when we have the longest day of the year. There's always a seed of yin that's in there, and all of a sudden that yin is sparked right after that solstice. And then throughout July and August, you have the yin growing. Even though the yang is still dominant, we still in July and August have mostly daylight, but it's starting to get shorter, and the yin is growing, and the darkness is growing. It'll keep growing until we hit the autumnal equinox in September, which again will be equal and will be over at 9 o'clock. And then as we keep moving through October, November, and December, the yin starts to take over and gets darker and darker until you hit the winter solstice at the end of December, at which point we've hit the greatest point of yin within the year. So it's always just this moving back and forth. So the same thing is true with these meridians. There's always a yin and yang pair. So I kind of wrote them in that previous slide with the yin meridian first and the yang meridian second. So the liver is a yin meridian. The gallbladder is a yang, the heart is yin, small intestine yang, and they're paired up with each other. So pericardium, triple warmer, together yin yang, spleen and stomach, yin and yang, the lungs and large intestine are a yin yang, and the kidney and the bladder are a yin and yang cycle. Now, there are also two extra channels in the body, which are the major yin channel and the major yang channel in the body. And the major yin channel is called the conception vessel. And it runs straight down, kind of from the top of your roof, actually. Your tongue is the connector between these two channels. So when your mouth is closed, your tongue is connected to the upper palate. And that palate kind of creates this loop around the body. The yin channel goes straight down your body and goes all the way to the perineal area. Then the yang channel starts at the perineum, comes straight up the spine, all the way to the top of the head, and then back down to the roof of the mouth. And that is the major yang channel. And they connect in Taoist philosophy. It's called the great microcosmic orbit. And those two channels are one full cycle. And the conception vessel on the front is the major yin channel, and the governing vessel on the back is the major yang channel. And together, all of the yin meridians get their source of yin from that yin channel, and all the yang meridians get their source of yang from the yang channels. So if there's any questions, I know I see one there, which is there a difference between reflexology and acupressure, and how do they intersect? So the systems are very similar. The way that they are similar is that they do work through the energy flow in the body. So reflexology is also an energy technique, and acupressure is an energy technique. That's about where the similarities might end, that they both use subtle energy in the body. But Chinese medicine, some people say that there are some connections in that they never used needles on the feet because they were so painful that they just ended up using finger pressure only on the feet. But they do have similarities. And when you start thinking about energy flow in the body, how does energy move in the body? One of the first big exposures in the West to Chinese medicine was back in the 1970s when President Nixon went to China. There was a cultural exchange trip. And one of the things they were doing on that trip is just exchanging different bits of information. And they were watching some of the Western scientists that went along on this trip were watching some surgeries being done without anesthetics. And they would ask the Chinese doctors, how are you doing this? And they would say, well, we use these needles and we're just blocking the flow of qi. And the Western doctors would go, what? They didn't really know what qi was. So then they started doing research. They knew something was happening. And they've done all sorts of different ideas on how the energy is moving in the body, and they haven't really come up with how it works completely, even though there is a new theory now that I think is the most accurate description of how energy flows in the body. And that is with what's called a holistic communicating network. So traditionally, there are two holistic communicating networks in the body. And what a holistic communicating network is for one thing, a couple things have to be true about it. One is that energy or that tissue that's of that system has to exist everywhere in the body. Otherwise, it couldn't be a holistic network. It also has to be communicating something. And so if I said to myself, is the digestive system a holistic communicating network? Well, the first question is the digestive system or digestive parts in every part of my body? But I don't have digestive tissue in my arms or my legs, so it can't be. Another way of thinking about it is if you disappeared everything in your body but that system, you should look very similar to the way you look now, even though you'd be one system and look strange that way. But if we all disappeared but our digestive system, we'd be a mouth, and tongue, and esophagus, and a bunch of guts. We'd have a hard time figuring out who is who. So traditionally, the two communicating networks in the body have been the circulatory, because if you disappeared everything about your body but your blood vessels, you would look very similar to the way you look now. Your arms, the shape of your arms would be there, your facial expressions would be there, because you have blood vessels that penetrate every single part of your body. And if anybody's ever seen a Body Worlds exhibit or the Bodies exhibits that go around to different science museums around the country, they've done that where they've kind of disappeared somebody but the circulatory system, and you can see that person's shape exactly. In fact, the last time I went to one of those exhibits, there was a goose, and I saw it from across the room, and I said, oh, look, they did a goose. I didn't go, what is that? It was very clearly a goose because every part of that goose was represented through the circulatory system. So that does exist everywhere. And then what's being communicated through the blood is the chemical communication system in the body. That's how the body talks to itself chemically. And the other one is, if you haven't guessed yet, is the nervous system. And you have nerves in every part of your body as well. And that is the body's electrical energy communication system. But what some research has unfolded in the last several years is that the fascia may be the wiring of the body's energy system. So fascia surrounds every single muscle, surrounds every single organ, surrounds every single bone, is one of the most abundant tissues in the body. In fact, if you disappeared everything but your fascia would give you the most accurate representation of the way you look with just one system as you would with everything. And so it's thing. And then what's being communicated is two things that the theories are right now, which make a lot of sense to me. One is that the mind-body connection rather, is happening through the fascia. There was some research that showed that fascia, there's 10 times more connective tissue cells in the brain than they once thought. And that fascia actually penetrates into the interior of a cell through receptors in cells, which is how your body kind of communicates with the internal cell. And so if there's a link with the fascia and more connected tissues in the brain, they think that maybe the mind-body connection is working through fascia. And they also think that essentially the body's wiring of the subtle energy may be happening through fascia. So that can be another similarity, is I think that's how reflexology works, is through fascia and the energy connection. Acupuncture and Chinese medicine also works through the fascia, but they have just slightly different takes on things. Reflexology is a much more Western approach to things, and Chinese medicine is more Asian or Chinese in specific. So that was a very long-winded answer to that question, but it was a point that I was going to get to anyway. There is a question about Marma Points, and Marma Points come from the Ayurvedic system, and they are very similar to Chinese points, but how they work them is a lot different. You know, the next thing I was going to talk about is the 5-element system. And in the Chinese system, you have the elements of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And the Ayurvedic system, if you've studied elemental nature or just some of the Aveda philosophies, it's infinity, air, fire, water, and earth. So between both systems, they have fire, water, and earth the same. Ayurvedic has infinity and air, and Chinese has wood and metal. And if you think about how they approach it, like if you work a Marma point, you're going to be working that point with extremely light pressure. And it's very, very, very subtle. If you work with chakras in the Ayurvedic system, it's usually a very subtle, light pressure. When you do acupuncture, you're sticking needles in the body. That's a very precise, hard thing you're doing. And when you use pressure point, like when I hit a pressure point on the inside of my eyebrow, I'm using a fair amount of pressure. And so one of the reasons I think these systems are both very similar, but they just develop differently based on the different approaches between the Chinese and the Indians. The Indians did a lot of things more subtly. And if you look at their two other elements, it's infinity and air, which are very subtle elements. You can't really see air, you can't see infinity, whereas the Chinese, everything was a lot more solid, using a lot more pressure, and their elements are wood and metal, which are very solid. So there are similarities, but the way you approach them and the way you do them are different. There's another question. Would working on the fascia physically in the body help with mental and emotional blockages? It's certainly thought that it's possible because tissue holds memory. And so anytime you're working, that's why sometimes when people are doing deep tissue work, I sometimes say it's energy work now, even though people have this idea of energy work as being very light and very subtle. But if you think about the fascia as energy channels in the body and you're working a lot of fascia with deep tissue, then you're actually doing energy work there. And I think any type of work that you're doing, whether it's reflexology, deep tissue, energy work, cranial sacral work, anything can bring out emotions, because when you look at things holistically, you can't separate the mind, body, and spirit. They're all one thing interacting together at any one time. And so touching one can always influence another. So it doesn't matter what technique you do, you can always, that can always happen. And I think, different therapists are more specialized in it. Sometimes it comes out more often. I think it often happens just with where that person is and how comfortable they feel with that particular therapist, whether an emotional experience happens. I don't really court it out in my treatments. I like to process things more personally when I'm getting treatments. In other words, a lot of the processing is happening, but I don't necessarily talk about it out loud. It's all processing in head. And I think a lot of the guests that I work with is the way that happens, but that's the energy that I bring to it. I've also gone to therapists where it's very much out in the open, so it kind of can vary. So with the Chinese 5 elements, as we go on, each one of those meridians is associated with an element. So the first one's, and it's all with those 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And the liver and the gallbladder are both wood. There's a yin and yang within the wood element. Then you have the heart and small intestines. Those are both the yin and yang of fire. There's a subset of fire with the pericardium and triple warmer. And then for earth, it is the spleen and the stomach. And then metal is the lungs and large intestine. And then the kidney and the bladder is the water element. And the way that the Chinese system works, which is a little different than Ayurveda. So if you know Ayurveda, with everything in Ayurveda, whatever's in balance is always the element that's too high. And you're always trying to settle it. With Chinese medicine, it's a little bit different in that there is 2 cycles called Shen and Ko. One is the creative cycle and one is the destructive cycle. And so each element gives life to another. So the order they're written is wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And that's the creative cycle, because if you have wood, that gives life to fire. You can't start a fire without having some wood or something to start it with. And so wood gives life to fire. That fire burns that wood and then creates ash. Ash is very earthy. And so earth is the element that's created from that. Then you have that ash can be compacted and compacted over long periods of times, and it forms solids in a metal. And then a metal can be melted into a liquid, which is water. And then water gives life to wood. And so we have those 5 elements. Sorry, my daughter's walking through the room now. We have those 5 elements in the creative cycle. Then you also have a destructive cycle. So I think the easiest place to start is with water. What does water do? It puts out a fire. So it controls fire. So if fire is excessive, water will help control it. Fire melts metal. And so if you need to control metal, fire will help control the metal. Metal in the shape of an axe will chop wood. And then wood, as a tree, would absorb water. And so you kind of have this destructive cycle as well. And so the way that an acupuncturist might work is that they're going to read a pulse on your inside of your arm. If you go from the styloid process and just kind of use 3 fingers, I got to figure out where my camera is and my angles. But if you have 3 fingers on the inside radial pulse, on both sides, there are 3 superficial pressures and 3 deep pressures. That represents 6 meridians on one hand, and then 3 superficial, 3 deep on the other hand represent the other 6 meridians. So what they can do is a pulse diagnosis where they might just kind of read pulse. And by the way, I think pulse diagnosis is one of the most difficult things to learn. When I was studying in India a few years ago with the Upadhyayas, with Aveda, we were going around to different places. And one of the places that Dr. Upadhyay took me to was this clinic. And that day they happened to be doing a pulse diagnosis class. And I was talking with some of the doctors in this class, and they were all in their 60s, these doctors. And I was like, talking to them, and I said, so how long have you been practicing Ayurvedic medicine? And some have been practicing it for 30 years. And they were taking a class on pulse diagnosis. And I said, so why are you taking a class on pulse diagnosis if you've been doing it for 30 years? And they go, oh, because the master is here. And there was a guy that was 90 years old that was teaching the class. They've been doing it for 60 years. And they were like, he knows so much more about this. Even though I've been doing it for 30 years, this guy's been doing it way longer. So I'm here to learn more. And I just love that attitude about learning. But that's how detailed the pulse diagnosis process can become. But let's say that they read a pulse and they figure out that the heart meridian seems to be a little more overactive. Maybe it's a very jumpy pulse. Well, they can say the heart meridian, which is fire, is overactive. So if I want to control that, I'm going to stimulate the water element in the body to help control the fire. Likewise, if the fire element was weak, then you could certainly go back to wood and help strengthen wood to help spark the fire. And so it's very complex with the way it works. So I just wanted to give you a little background on the theories, even though you probably don't need the theory a whole lot, unless you were just going into it more. I always like to kind of give a little bit of an introduction to the theory so everybody recognizes that acupressure is quite detailed. We're going to go over about 15 points now. And for the people who are asking, can a hairdresser use this? Yes, I'm going to be showing you some points that we can find on each other, or I guess not each other, on ourselves during class here. And then you could certainly use those on your guests when salons are back open. So you certainly can use it. And I always just like to give that extra information just because, acupressure can seem quite simple. But to become an acupuncturist, it's 4 years of education. And I personally think a lot of acupuncturists don't know what they're doing until 10 years into it. So it's a very complex science that takes a long time to learn, but you can certainly have a good starting point. So when it comes to acupressure points, there are several points that we can do. And I broke them down in this class according to elemental nature. So it kind of combines the Ayurvedic theory with the Chinese theory. And that's just the way I categorize them. So if you know, full spectrum is good for all 3 doshas. If somebody has excess infinity air or vata, then these are all calming points. The fire points kind of work with digestion and kind of help cool the body. And then the water earth points are all stimulating points to And you can always think about each one of these points. What a pressure point is in Chinese medicine, it's an area where the energy comes closer to the surface of the skin. So when it comes closest to the surface of the skin, then is everybody okay to hear me? Because I see a couple people say can't hear, and I don't know if that's something on my end or whether it's something on the moderator's end. So if you can't hear me, maybe somebody just put I can still hear, and maybe it's just an individual computer. Or if you can't hear, I just want to make sure before I say a lot of things that no one can hear. So I'm not seeing anything from anybody, so I'm guessing we're okay. You can hear? Okay, we can still hear. All right, great. So acupressure points are areas where the energy comes closer to the surface of the skin. And so you can affect it through pressure. So there are many, many points in the body. They always have, there's two different names to all the points. I like to call them a right brain name and a left brain name. One's very logical and analytical. Like this point here is called Bladder 2. The first point on the Bladder Meridian is Bladder 1. Then you have Bladder 2. The 10th point on the Bladder Meridian is Bladder 10. So they're kind of like the direction of the meridian, whatever the first point of that meridian, and then it goes all the way to Bladder 67 at the end of your toe in that particular case. There's that name, but then there's also, like for Bladder 2, the name is Drilling Bamboo. So there's a kind of a, the Chinese language is all character based, and it's a little bit more flowery, I think, with the imagery. And so they kind of have a point with kind of talks about its function or effect. Sometimes I understand why they named it that, sometimes I don't. So it's just kind of fascinating. So I'll refer to both names as well. So let's do a few points together. So you have to bear with me as I figure out the best angles to see all the points, and I'll kind of describe all the points as best I can. Well, but I like to start, and these I think some of the best points for hairdressers too. I always told students in the massage school I used to run that if you didn't do these points on every guest by the time you graduated, you weren't allowed to graduate, because I think they're some of the most important points. In the Aveda spa rituals, doing these points is one of the rituals. So you really should be doing it in every treatment. And I think it's great in the pressure in the massages that hairdressers give. And I think in every massage and facial treatment, these points should be done too. But they're all at the back of your head. The first thing I want you to do is just reach on the back of your head. There's a little bump on the back of your head, which is right here on me. I hope you can see that okay. That bump is called the external occipital protuberance. And if you go directly underneath it, right along the occipital ridge, that is a point called governing vessel 16. So it's on that major yang channel. And it's also called yang white. So it's governing vessel 16 and yang white. Then if you go about a finger's width lateral to that, right here, that is a point called Bladder 10. It's a finger's width lateral. You can feel that. The best way to do it is with your thumbs and just kind of massage into that area. That is called Bladder 10, or the heavenly pillar. And then we have one that's about a finger to a finger and a half switch over, the largest indentation on the back of the head. I'll show it on myself here. That one is Gallbladder 20, or Heaven's Gate. So heavenly pillar, Heaven's Gate, Heaven's Gate, they're both heavenly points. They feel really good for one. And in general, I think they're really good points for getting energy moving from the head. So these are all exit points for energy from the head. The energy is flowing through the head, and then it exits the head at that point. With the shape of the neck and the head right there, the channel is kind of narrow, so it's tendency to kind of get bottlenecked there. So it's a good point to work. From a physical standpoint, you have over 20 muscles that attach in this area as well. And when you only have the 12, those 20 muscles, the attachment points are quite sensitive. So you really could look at working that area in two different ways. One is through energy and freeing up energy. You can also look at as working those those attachment points of those muscles to help free up tension in the head, neck, and shoulders. But those points are really effective for people that are thinking too much. They're really stressed out. They're very calming points because they kind of get that energy away from the head. I think a lot of us know when we're really stressed out or you have insomnia, you think too much. And I think that's just energy trapped in the head. And so these points get that energy moving. So I'll show them to you again. Hopefully you have both the PowerPoint and me on the screen, because that's what it is on my screen. And that's I think what they said they were going to do as well. So, but I'll show you the points again just so we kind of have them one more time. Governing vessel 16, bladder 10, gallbladder 20. And you can just work them with circular friction motion. You know, there's a lot of different ways to work points. So there's some books that even go through like 40 or 50 different techniques. And I think any technique you use on it is fine. The most important thing is just being on the location of the point, which unfortunately I can't show you in this format. For sure, I can give you an idea, but it's the more and more you kind of do it, the better and better you get at locating the precise points and getting more accurate with those. So we also have in the full spectrum category a few other points. So we have those ones on the back of the head. You also have one called Gallbladder 21. And Gallbladder 21 is a great point for people that have a lot of tension in the head, neck, and shoulders. If you kind of come from your ear and just drop straight down where your head and neck meet, it's this point right here. And that is really, you know, all these points have a local effect, meaning they affect the area where they are, but they can also have a systemic effect, which is how they affect the system. And this one is used mostly for its local effect with upper tension, tension in the upper body, and particularly the upper trapezius. It's right in the middle of the upper trapezius. It's oftentimes a trigger point, which acupressure points and trigger points can sometimes be similar and sometimes be different. You know, trigger points are always located in the belly of muscles. And this one's in the belly of a muscle, so it could be a trigger point as well, whereas a lot of acupressure points are up against bone, in which case they wouldn't be trigger points, but they all work through fascia. So again, there's similarities and differences. And if you want, there is information on all of these points in the reference guide. So there's a picture of all of them, and then there's a description of all of them, where they are, as well as the name and both the name of the point, Gallbladder 21, as well as shoulder well, and a description of where it is. And so use that reference guide. There's two things, the reference guide and the workbook. The reference guide just has all the information in there. So that one's probably easiest when we're not in a live class where you kind of can take notes and follow along a little bit better. That one's just all there, so you can just kind of listen and know you have it as reference when you might need it. So the other point that we have, which to me, this is one of probably the most well-known of all the Chinese pressure points, and it is called large intestine 4, or adjoining of the valleys. And it is located on your hand. Where, tarsals on the feet, carpal, and kind of slide back until you hit a little indentation in the bone right here. And that point there is called large intestine 4, adjoining of the valleys. It's one of the major health points in the body. It's good for everybody. Headaches in particular, this point is known for. I think it works with about 75% of headaches. And the more energetic a headache, the better these energetic techniques work. So it's a really nice point for headaches. It's also a general health point, can kind of help boost the immune system, as well as works with the digestive system, in particular kind of where the large and small intestine meet, the ileocecal valve it's called, is kind of where it works with that system. But it's on the large intestine meridian. It's the 4th point there. And it is large intestine 4. You know, this point was one when I was in massage school. I learned this point, and I was taught to do it by kind of pressing in between the hand and thumb like that. And I worked in a restaurant, and I had several people, you know, people got headaches quite a bit. And when they had headaches, I was kind of that eager young massage student. Let me try this point and see if it works. And I went and did it that way I was taught, and it didn't do a thing. The person's like, I don't feel a thing. The second person that night didn't feel a thing. And I kept doing it because I was that eager massage student. I wasn't going to stop. And on the third try, I actually slipped when I was doing that point. And instead of like hitting it the way that I was taught in between, I slipped and moved into that point. And all of a sudden my finger just slid into the bone. I kind of forgot about the person I was working on, because all of a sudden I just felt this nice little indentation where my finger just seemed to naturally fit. And when I started working, all of a sudden that person said, oh my gosh, my headache's feeling better. And then I realized, like, oh, that's the most important thing, is when you actually hook in to the point very precisely, you get a lot better effect than if you're just near the point. So that's one of the most important things, is being on the point, not near the point. So if you just slide along the index finger, once you get from the head of the metacarpal and just slide down until you kind of get right where the thumb meets, there should be a nice little indention. Again, we're trying to find that. Then we have two on the legs. So this is where it's going to get really interesting. But the first one is if you put your knee or your fingers right at the bottom of your kneecap, 3 fingers width. And if you find it 3 fingers width down and then slide laterally, is a point called stomach 36 or 3 mile run. It was called 3 mile run back in the old days because the Chinese army used to walk everywhere, and the Chinese army would always, after every 3 miles or so, would stop and everybody would massage this point on themselves to help prevent shin splints. So it was for it's called 3 mile run or walk 3 more miles. And it's located, again, 3 fingers width below your kneecap and then laterally. So I'm going to try and show this one as best I can. So if you find your kneecap, there's the bottom of my kneecap. I have 3 fingers width. Once I get to 3 fingers width, I'm going to slide laterally, which will probably look like medial, but it is lateral. And then it's right here. So again, 3 fingers widths from the bottom of the kneecap, and then slide down and across. And you should reach into a little indention. And that is stomach 36. It is also a good general health point. The stomach meridian starts right below your eye and comes down. So I think it's a good grounding point too. So it can be very good for kind of grounding you in the body, because it kind of draws the energy away from the head. And I think most people's issues is too much energy in the head because we think so much. So I think anytime you can kind of ground people in general, that's a good thing to do. And then the last of the full spectrum points, and for those that, the one question about points for lethargy and fatigue, that's a much more a water and earth condition. So when we get to the water earth points, those might be a little bit better for fatigue, because they're going to be more stimulating points. So the last of the full spectrum points is one called spleen 6 or 3 yin crossing. It's called 3 yin crossing because there are 3 yin meridians. You know, the 3 meridians on the inside of the leg, which are the liver, spleen, and kidney, all have an intersection point at this point. So they call it 3 yin crossing. And so that point is 4 fingers width. So you're going to find your medial malleolus, which is your inside ankle bone, and you're going to go 4 fingers width up from that, and then try to find it on the tibia bone, which is your lower leg bone. So I'll try to show that one as best I can as well. So you're going to find the inside ankle bone, 4 fingers width, and then you're going to start right, and it's going to be right here. This one can be really, really tender on a lot of different people, but it's generally good for getting energy flowing up the body, because again, there's 3 meridians that intersect there. It gets that energy flowing up the body. It is also known kind of as one of the women's point, because it really helps to, it can really help with your menstruation cycle and cramping. So I've had a lot of students over the years tell me that point's been really helpful when they've had it's pretty bad cramping. So that's something you can certainly try. You know, it doesn't always work, but when the cramping is mostly energetic, which I think a lot of it is, then this energy technique can work really well for it. So again, that's 4 fingers widths from the inside ankle, and then right there on the tibia bone. And usually this point's quite tender on a lot of people. And I think, you know, it's good for men too. So don't think just because it has that extra benefit for women that it's not good for men. I work this point on myself all the time, and it's not an issue. And it's usually tender as well. And I think that's because it's just a good energetic point for getting things moving up the body, since you have those 3 the energy meridians that move up the inside of the leg are all moving in this particular direction. So those are just good all over points for everybody, no matter what's going on. And then we also have some infinity air points, which are going to be in general a little bit more calming points. So the first one is called Gallbladder 14, and that is a finger's width above your eyebrow, directly in line with the pupil. So if you find a fingers above the eyebrow directly in line with the pupil, so if you're looking ahead, there should be a nice little indentation in the frontal bone where this point is. You don't need a lot of pressure on this particular point, but you can really get that. And this is just really good for calming the nervous system. It's said to help stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest nervous system. And I think it's interesting. The Chinese have this point. If you've ever heard of a treatment called Shirodara in Ayurveda, which is when they pour warm oil onto the forehead, that's said to calm the nervous system too. And so there's a lot of, the forehead's very much associated with calming the nervous system. And I was actually reading in a book several years ago about embryological development, and the nervous system and the forehead are developing at a very similar time. So even Western science is going, yes, there's a connection between the forehead and calming the nervous system. So it's kind of fascinating that the Chinese and the Indians have kind of figured these things out a long time ago, and then science kind of catches up and goes, yeah, there is a connection there. So that is the gallbladder 20, I think. Or did I kind of lost my train of thought there? Gallbladder 14, sorry, gallbladder 14. We also have a point called CV17, which is located right in the center of your chest. It's if you find the bottom of your sternum, which the bottom of my sternum is about right here, and then you go 3 fingers widths up right here, right in the middle of your chest is called the Sea of Tranquility, or CV17, which is a conception vessel 17. So it's just said to be a little bit more calming point in the body. And it's right in the center of the chest. It's also working, obviously, with the heart chakra. It's right in that same area, if you're familiar with the chakra system. And then we have a point called large intestine 11, or crooked pond. And so what we're going to do with this one is you're going to find the corner of the elbow. If you kind of bend your elbow so it forms a V, and you put your thumb right in the bottom of that V, that's actually a slightly different point. But once you find that point, if you move proximally or toward the shoulder about a centimeter or so, that is where this crooked pond point is, which is good for high blood pressure. It's kind of good for calming. It can kind of work with headaches as well, but it's a very calming point. So again, if you find the crook of the elbow right here, so your olecranon process is way over here. So you're kind of more lateral than that. But I usually just try to kind of, if you put your hand on your shoulder, then you can find the bottom of that V. Once you find the bottom of that V in the bone, then you just slide over just a tiny little bit. So if you're doing it on your left arm, you just move a little bit to the left. If you're doing it on the right arm, you move a little bit to the right in this particular angle of pressure. It's a lot harder to show on a camera than it is in person. All right, so we also have a couple of points on the feet that we can do that are the same here. One of them is called Kidney 1. And so Kidney 1 is, if you are familiar with reflexology, for those that ask that question, it's the center point of the diaphragm reflex, but it's also called Kidney 1. So if you kind of bring your foot in, this is always fun, and curl your toes, everything should gather at a central spot underneath the toe right here. So it's right in here. This is one of the strangest classes, I'm sure, that you've ever seen now, with somebody sticking their foot right up into the camera. But right there is Kidney 1. So if you kind of curl your toes where everything kind of gets right in the middle, you can also do the same thing in the hand, where you curl the hand and everything kind of gathers at a central spot. That point is called Kidney 1. In Chinese medicine, that's the start of the whole energetic system. We're said to draw in the energy from the earth through that point, and then it goes through the kidney meridian, down the bladder meridian, goes through all 12 of the meridians kind of one at a time, starting at Kidney 1. So that is a really good grounding point for people. And again, it's on the feet. Anytime you're working on the feet, I think you're, again, pulling energy away from the head, which is really good for people. And then we also have a point called Bladder 67, which is located, just making sure I'm not doing a different point. I want to make sure I got, yep. Or sorry, it's Bladder 62, not 67. That's what I wanted to make sure of. Bladder 62 is called Calm Sleep, So this is a good point to do if you have insomnia. And it's located at the bottom. If you find the ankle bone, on the outside ankle bone this time instead of the inside ankle bone that we found spleen 6. But if you find your outside ankle bone, and then you find the corner of the heel, and you go right in between those two. So right there. So find your outside ankle bone and the corner of the heel, and go right in between the two. That is a point called bladder 62, or calm sleep. And that is a very obviously calming point for that particular one. So then we can move on to some fire points. So several of them are on the feet, but we're going to do governing vessel 20 first. Governing vessel 20 is called the 100 meeting point. And if you kind of have lines that go from every single part of the head, they all meet up at the top of the head, kind of at the crown. And that is called gallbladder 20, or sorry, governing vessel 20, or the 100 meeting point. This is the very crown of your head. Like I said, if you drew lines, they all kind of meet at that same spot at the top of the head. And this is said to help increase your focus and concentration. So if you've got a lot of homework to study, this point can be a good one to do when you're in a long study session, because it's said to help increase your focus and increase your concentration. We also have one called CV12, which is the solar plexus point. So you're kind of going to go, if you find the xiphoid process right at the bottom of your sternum, then just go right below that, and then press. You're not pressing on a bone. You should be kind of pressing into flesh, just right in the solar plexus region. It's also the third chakra area, is a point called CV12, which is good for just helping you. It kind of works with your intentions in life and keeping you on track and focused with where you want to go. So it does tie in quite a bit with the third chakra and some of the philosophy around the third chakra. And then the other 3 points are all on the foot. So that's always the hardest one to do. But if you go to the inside of the toe, you have a point called liver 2. We're going to do liver 2 and liver 3. So we're doing 2 back-to-back points. But liver 2 is located on the inside of the big toe, right in there. So if you're going to go to the inside of the toe, at the base of the toe, you're kind of pressing near the proximal phalange. So you can kind of just grab on the inside of your big toe, right where the kind of in between, but you're pressing up against the bone of the big toe. That is where liver 2 is, which can be good for a lot of digestive issues. And then if you just slide down in between the big toe and the second toe until you kind of hit a little divot, that is liver 3, or supreme rushing is its other name. So if we were at liver 2 here, liver 3, we just want to slide down, so it's right here. So that is liver 3, or supreme rushing. That one is said to be really good for headaches and hangovers. So a lot of students seem to like that point. When I was teaching in the school, they would always joke about that. When I actually had, in one class, I had a girl use a Sharpie to mark it because she really wanted to use it. Apparently she really liked drinking and needed to know where that point was. But that is liver 3. And then you also have another spleen point located right in the middle of the arch of the foot. So if you kind of go up the arch of the foot, right in the middle, pressing up against the arch, is that spleen 6, or spleen point, spleen 4, I think it is, with grandfather name. That is a really good point for digestive issues as well. And it's also on the spinal reflex in reflexology. So you can see there is some crossover with some of these points, but it's really your intention. You know, I always say in massage that 90% of a massage is intention, only 10% is technique. So you can have, you know, one point that has a lot of different effects based on the intention you bring to it. Sometimes it could be a matter intent, working with muscles. Sometimes it could be an energetic intent. So it varies. Or it could be a reflexology intent versus acupressure. Your intent can really matter. It really just means you need to focus when you're with your guests. I think the more focus you have when you're doing massage, the more effective your treatments are, rather than, when you're a student, you usually have really good focus because you're still learning what you're doing. So it's easier. You have to kind of pay attention because you need to know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing yet, so you have to pay attention to learn it. But once you kind of get into a pattern, then it's much harder. So let's say that, if you go to New York City and you've never been there before and you're driving, you're going to be really paying attention the whole time where you're going because you have no idea where you are. Whereas when you're at home and you go back and forth to school or go back and forth to work every day, it's such a usual pattern. You get on the autopilot and kind of forget where you're going and your body just takes you there. So if you got to get to that point in massage where you just do massage and you're not thinking about it, you're not going to be as effective as you can always bring your intention back to the work that you're doing. So then we have a few more points before we wrap up. And those are the water earth points. And so several of these are on the face. So the first one is bladder 2. I've kind of mentioned this a few times, but if you go to the very medial end of your eyebrow, I usually start at the bridge of the nose, and then I just slide up to the medial end of the eyebrow. You should feel a little indentation in the bone. It's called drilling bamboo, but this point is really good for sinus congestion and any areas kind of in this region where you have pain, a frontal headache, because the bladder meridian goes up over the head and then exits the head at bladder 10 that we did earlier. And this point just frees up that energy from the frontal area. So it can be good for headaches, particularly frontal headaches, as well as any sinus congestion from an energetic standpoint. We also have one of the best points for sinus congestion is called stomach 3. If you start at the flare of your nostrils, slide along the zygomatic arch or the cheekbone until you get directly below the pupil of the eye. Can be a very tender point. Very, very tender point for a lot of people, but it's one of the best points for sinus congestion. So anytime I get congestion, this is a point that I work, even though I rarely get congestion because of some fascial techniques I've done over the years. That's a whole nother class, so I won't get into it too much, but this is a really good point for sinus congestion. And then you also have large intestine 20, which is right beside the flare of the nostril. So you should feel the top of the teeth when you're pressing down on that particular one. So this is another good one for sinus congestion. This is also called welcoming perfume. So it's supposed to help you smell better as well. And it's right at the flare of the nostrils, and you should again feel the top of the teeth. So one was a little bit further over on the zygomatic arch, the other straight down, pressing out the top of the teeth is where that particular point is. And then we have two more points. Which is CV22, the conception vessel 22. That's just at the very bottom, or very top of the sternum, rather. So if you just go straight into your tray, right in between where your clavicles meet, and you just press down onto the sternum, right there. It's said to be really good for hiccups, even though, it's worked for me a couple times with hiccups, but not all the time. So it's not a, anything in acupressure, I always like to say, is not this miracle cure-all because it's an energy technique. When the issue is energetic, these points are really effective. If the issue is something else, it's not as effective. When I do my holistic theory class, I sometimes talk about I think sometimes people get a disease and they take a drug. And some people on that disease have a really great effect with that drug. Other people don't get the benefit from the drug and just get a lot of side effects. And I think that's because the drugs work on the matter layer. If there's a matter issue, the drug works well. If there's not, if it's more of an emotional issue for that person, the drug doesn't have the same thing to attack and you get more of the side effects. So, I don't think anything's a miracle cures. I think when you do holistically, you need to address it from a matter standpoint, an energetic standpoint, an emotional standpoint, a spiritual standpoint, an intellectual standpoint. All those come together to really form a holistic theory. So by themselves, the techniques may or may not be as effective depending on what's going on. With energetic, it works really well. A lot of sinus stuffs can be energetic. So it works well. Headaches can oftentimes be energetic. So there's some things that works better on than others. So that's at CV22. And then the last point is called Lung 1. It's a really good point for just opening up the chest. I think a lot of us have a lot of tension because, we're in these forward positions all the time. So this one can kind of help open things up in the opposite direction. But if you go about 5 to 6 inches lateral from the midline over, and you're pressing, there's one little spot where you just kind of slide into the pectoralis major, the deepest, and you're actually hitting in between the first and second ribs, is where you should feel like you're in intercostal space, and that is Lung 1. Sometimes when I work this point, I open my arm out a little bit, so I can kind of open it up a little bit and kind of feel that point. But you should be in between the first and second ribs. It might be a little tender, but I go 5 to 6 inches lateral from the midline over, and then just kind of feel where I can just naturally sink into the ribs easiest. And that's where those points are. So that goes through some of the points. I know it's kind of a quick hour lesson, but hopefully you got some, even if you learn a couple of those points, usually what I recommend that you do is if there are 2 or 3 points that kind of struck you today, try to practice them every day on yourself. And then when we can get back to working on guests, then work them, all week on every guest you have. And if you keep doing those same points, just pick 2 or 3 one week and just do them on every guest you have, you get really good at those points. And then the next week, pick a few more points. And then eventually, most acupuncturists only use 60 to 70 points regularly anyway. And we've kind of gone through 15 to 20 just to introduce you to some things. So I hope you enjoyed the time. It was really fun to be with everybody in this. It's kind of nice because I've been helping my kids with their online learning. They're in 6th grade and 3rd grade. And I've been like the student the whole time, trying to figure out how to help them be better students online. And now I got to do it from the other end and kind of sympathize with the teachers a little bit more. So do I have a favorite point? I think the points on the back of the occipital ridge are my favorite points. I use them on every guest, and I've worked on every guest for the last 29 years. I've been working those points because I had a good experience with them in school when I learned them, and I've always done those things. So do you need a certificate or license to use acupressure in your massage? You don't necessarily. Now, the one thing I don't encourage you to do is put acupressure on your business card and market it as a tool. I kind of just integrate acupressure into my treatment. So you have the license to touch and you have license to press, and the more you learn, the more you can integrate it. But I wouldn't put it down as your specialty unless you take a lot further program and get certified. But you can always use it. Like I said, I teach hairdressers all the time to use the points when they're doing a scalp and shoulder massage, because you can always use, we need more touch in the world, and we're going to need more touch in the world because we're all going to be touchless for the next few months. So we're going to need it even more, I think, later. So yes, you can do it. I just wouldn't promote yourself as an acupressurist unless you've had further training. I know here in Minneapolis, another massage school I work at is also a shiatsu school, and it's a 500-hour program just for shiatsu. If you had a program like that, then put it down. But if you've just had this class, use the points, but just don't promote it as being an acupressurist, because you need a lot more education. Like I said, it's 4 years to become an acupuncturist. So I'm not seeing any new questions. Thank you for all the positive feedback. Hopefully I'll be able to teach another class with you again, depending on how long all this is going to last. I have a feeling it's going to be for a while. So I am happy to come back and do some other classes on whatever topics you may want. So thanks again for having me. I do have a Facebook page called Marc Z Massage Therapy and Education. So feel free to look at that. I haven't been posting much now because we are closed. I work at the Jute Spa in Minneapolis, and we are closed until at least May 1st at this point. So I kind of haven't been posting too much, and I've just been kind of taking care of my kids for now. But I'll probably get back to posting soon. So thanks again for your time, and I hope you have a great weekend as best you can in these crazy, crazy times.